No, they should be fine. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats, we're about to begin. So for those of you who are making your way in, we're going to close off those doors there and just, well, they'll have to be outside to hear this. Anyway, anybody outside will have to make their way through the top door, if you wouldn't mind. You're all very welcome back. And I hope you had a very nice lunch and that you get to see more exhibitions down by the village hall. So we're now about to begin our third panel discussion. The first two, I think, were really interesting. Some great points expressed from our guests who were joining me on stage. And then again, of course, it was great to hear your own points of view. And I think if we can keep this going, feel free once we hear some initial statements from our panelists on stage, I'll be inviting you to participate. As usual, we will be monitoring, the team here will be monitoring the Twitter feed. So it's Food 2030, hashtag Food 2030 EU. So this afternoon we have a very busy schedule as well, 2 panel debates, and we're going to hear as well from the experiences from cities, 2 examples. I know that quite a few of you may be going for planes afterwards, and don't worry, I'm getting a plane back to Dublin this evening as well, so I will make sure that you're all out on time, so don't worry about that. Okay, so now to panel 3, and this time we're talking about circularity. We want to really talk about how you can implement sustainability and do so within a circular economy system. We've touched on these already this morning. We want to look at, what kind of new techniques, new business models are required for the circular economy and how they can lead to a more responsible and ethical way of providing safe, high-quality food for the global population. Again, we'll be touching on topics that we already had this morning. So let me introduce our panel, and then we'll hear from our keynote speaker as well. So Janez Potočnik, who will be our keynote speaker, is the co-chair of the International Resource Panel hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme. He is an ex-EU commissioner. Stephane Guilbert is a professor in food science and an advisor for sustainability of food systems, urban food systems, and biomass systems with the INRA in Montpellier. Inge Hanssen is the R&D manager of DCM, which is a family-owned Belgian company that's active in organic fertilizers and plant health products. Lydia Smith is the head of NIAB, Innovation Farm National Institute of Agricultural Botany. Richard Swannell is the Director of Sustainable Food Systems and Technical Lead at RAP, which is a not-for-profit company working on resource efficiency and circular economy. And Sveinn Mageirsson is the CEO of Matas Limited, which is an Icelandic, it's a not-for-profit agency as well, and he'll tell us a little bit more about that as well. So first, perhaps to you, Mr. Potočnik, if you could give us some opening points.
Good morning, or good day, everybody. It's my second conference, that's why probably good morning. 2030, food, sustainable and circular food systems. If we really want seriously to talk about the food systems, it's extremely important that we put everything into the context. What was happening in the 20th century and what is decisively influencing on our lives. We call the 20th century the century of the great acceleration, growth of population by a factor of 3.7, annual extraction of construction materials grew by a factor of 34, ores and minerals by a factor of 27, fossil fuels by a factor of 12, biomass by a factor of 3.6, average total material extraction by factor 8, and greenhouse gas emissions grew by a factor of 13. Another thing which is determining the 20th century is, of course, also globalization. For the first time, we are interconnected, interdependent, and in a way, we are living on a world which is becoming global small village. The consequences are pretty clear. Probably you all know this planetary boundaries research work from Rockstrom and the others who followed, Stephane. But the conclusion which you could draw from the latest evaluation, that's 2015, it's relatively simple. The two areas in which we are most overshooting planetary boundaries, it's management of nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients management, and disappearance of biodiversity. And the two other areas in which we are in yellow zone, it's land system change and climate change. So the conclusion which is behind that is that practically everything that it's very closely connected to the food system. So the way how we will in the future manage our food systems and provide food for growing population will be the most challenging task we will deal with. If we look into the 21st century, the facts we can't ignore. The growth of population, we have used to the figure 9.7 billion till 2050, but let me translate that figure to you that you would know what we talk about. In one generation, we will have additionally on the planet 2.5 billion people. At the beginning of 20th century, 100 years ago, it was 1.4 billion in total. In 1 year, additional Germany. In 4 years, additional United States of America. In 9 days and 6 hours, it's my country, but it's obviously small. Per capita consumption, so everything that is actually happening in the lowest, in the countries where the development level is the lowest, which means that also the per capita consumption, due to the fact that these countries will grow quickest of all, also the per capita consumption will grow enormously. So it's expected that approximately 3 billion people would move from the lowest to the middle class consumption till 2030. Just one example, China used more cement in the 3 years, 2011, 2013, than the United States of America in the whole 20th century. So these are the type of challenges we deal with. And if we add to that poverty and social inequality, Oxfam report is saying that 62 people own the same as half of the world, and the richest 1% is more wealthy than the rest of the world, that 60% of ecosystems are already degraded or used unsustainably, and on the top of that, increasing evidence of the climate change threat, and we have the whole picture. So sustainability will be an issue of the 21st century. Food systems are at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The food we grow, harvest, process, trade, transport, store, sell, and consume is the essential connecting thread between people, prosperity, and the planet. Some worrying facts. 1/3 of soils is moderately to highly degraded due to erosion, nutrient depletion, acidification, salinization, compaction, and chemical pollution. 60% of global terrestrial biodiversity loss is related to food production. Ecosystem services supporting food production are often under pressure. By the way, these are the data which we have published just recently in our International Resource Panel report. I'm co-chairing that UNEP panel in the last 2 years. Of the total input in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers, only 15 to 20% actually reaches the consumer's plates. Globally, food systems account for around 24% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Nearly 800 million people are hungry, and over 2 billion suffer from micronutrition deficiencies, while over 2 billion people are obese. This is the typical picture of a food system, which is, by the way, globally differing, of course, but they are all often interconnected and depending on the same resources. And whenever we talk about food systems, it's really important that we do not believe or think that we can solve the issues only via the agriculture. We need to look and address the whole picture. Where to focus research and innovation efforts to support the transition to sustainable and circular food systems? Allow me to share with you 12 conclusions which came from our food system report in the context of resource management. First, reduce food loss and waste. Second, reorientate away from resource-intensive products such as meat empty calories and ultra-processed food, and rethink the food environment, the physical and social surroundings that influence what people eat, especially relevant in urban areas, to facilitate consumers adopting more healthy and sustainable diets. Third, reframe thinking by promoting resource-smart food systems, in which climate-smart agriculture plays one part, and search for linkages to new dominant values such as well-being and also health. Fourth, reconnect rural and urban, especially in developing regions, where urban actors like supermarkets could invest in regional supply chains and improve the position of smallholders. Revalue the pricing of environmental externalities, reinforce legislation to prevent pollution and other forms of environmental degradation, remove subsidies that provide disincentives for better resource efficiency. Reconnect urban consumers with how their food is produced and how it reaches their plates, inform them about the health and environmental consequences of dietary choices, protect peri-urban zones around cities, and use them for local food production. 7, research the current functioning of the local, national, or regional food systems and their impact on national resources. 8, reconnect mineral flows between urban areas and rural areas, as well as between crop and livestock production. 9, reform policies on land and water rights, develop and implement policies at all levels of governments, to enable better resource management, encourage synergetic adaptive governance by the wide range of non-state actors within the food system. 10, reinvigorate investment in rural infrastructure, education, training, technology, knowledge transfer, and payments of environmental services. 11, research and innovate to decouple food production from resource use and environmental impacts, and to replace certain inputs such as pesticides with ecosystem services. And finally, rebuild feedback loops by functional and informative monitoring and also reporting at various levels such as countries, cities, and companies. So these were the recommendations, a summary of the report which we have produced together. This is also an interesting thing. What is telling you, this is the typical concentration of power in the Western type food chain. It's for Netherlands, 65,000 farmers, 6,500 food manufacturers, 1,500 suppliers, 5 purchasing companies, then 25 supermarket concepts, 4,500 supermarkets, 7 million shoppers, and almost 17 million consumers. Why I'm showing that? Because it's very important if you want to deal with the tricky questions of food sustainability, that you really understand well where the power is concentrated and where you actually have to concentrate also to move some of the hurdles of the changes. I'm also chairing the RISE Foundation. These are the last 3 reports which we produce. They are all practically connected to circular economics, sustainable intensification, public goods, and nutrient recovery and reuse, and the next we will focus on livestock production. Finally, 2 things which are not yet out, but they are coming out. The first one is connected to a report in which I'm also contributing. It is about 10 major investment opportunities in Europe till 2025 in circular economics. 4 out of 10 are identified in the food sector: scaling regenerative agriculture, closing nutrient loops, scaling urban farms, and next wave protein sources. And this will be published, so this is a teaser. This will be published in October or beginning of November, while the second part, which is dealing with something which is emerging through the Sustainable Business Commission, will be only published next year, but these are the first draft which I have already in my hands. What is the Business Sustainability Commission? It's actually bottom-up activity which was built after the Sustainable Development Goals was developed by the progressive companies trying to find out and analyze what would be the consequences for the business sector if we implement till 2030 the Sustainable Development Goals. And here are also the areas which are mentioned in connection to the food system. I will not go one by one, just to tell you that you can expect also that. It will clearly also show, at least from the business angle, what you can expect and where are the major challenges which you should address. On the top of that, don't forget that, of course, public money predominantly would need to go for addressing public goods and public services, because it's really important that in that we move also in a direction which would have, which is many times connected to a lot of externalities which are here existing, but we are not properly valuing it, and public good should be central in our thinking and philosophy. To conclude, new economic model based on sustainable consumption and production, integrating all three pillars of sustainability, is simply necessary and unavoidable, including the food sector. As my good friend Pavan Sukhdev is saying, we have to fix a broken compass. Policy approach, if I'm asked which policies would need to change, practically the answer is all. So whatever policy you touch up, you would find out that something is wrong, and that the incentives which we are giving through the systems of policy making are not exactly sending us into a direction which would all like and which would lead us into sustainable future. And what is extremely important, in particular in the area of food systems, it's active dialogue with all stakeholders, because transition will only be possible if we actively involve those losing in the process of transition and those who will have to change. Governance will be extremely important on that travel. Governments should be more focused or structured around the problems. As I said, agricultural commissioner or minister cannot solve the problem of the food system. So you need basically few of ministers seriously cooperating if you want to solve that issue. So integration of policies is crucial. For example, around sustainable food chain. We need to move policy from innovative parts to innovative wholes. Many innovative parts simply not create innovative wholes, and no one in the government is looking at the big picture. I've been in national government for 10 years and exactly the same also in the European government, and I can assure you that's the fact. Administrative endeavor should be changed to a creative endeavor, so creativity in public sector should become much more present, because the best definition of bureaucratic behavior is improving the wrong things to an ideal state. Embedding a new capability, engaging everybody and the ownership, we should replace the complainants box with the ideas box. We should aim at impossible projects and force ourselves to rethink the principles. So a new structure, a new logic, new culture, new social contract. There are two, or it's better to say three ideal quotes for the time in which we are living, coming from two people you certainly know, Albert Einstein and Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa. Einstein saying we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use when we have created them. And even more clearly, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa added, everything has to change if we want to remain the same. That's actually the story of Sustainable Development Goals, and that's the story how to connect economic, social, and environment concerns and interests and address them in a proper way. Thank you.
Okay, so for the first two panels I went this way, so I might go this way now and start with you, Sveinn Mageirsson. You come from Iceland. You're the CEO of a national agency as such, or one that looks into the whole circular economy. And you're very much involved as well at looking at fish and aquaculture. From your perspective, and I suppose especially given some of the points that Mr. Potočnik has touched on as well, like how can we engage more with aquaculture for the circular economy?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I come from Iceland, but I'm not a soccer player, so I can't do everything, I guess. But I think we need to look beyond, and in a way that was what we tried to do in the soccer. We tried to look beyond what we did before, and you mentioned beyond GDP. I think we need to look beyond agri-food. I absolutely hate that word. I think we ought to be talking about food, but not agri-food. We have loads of different resources in the past, but especially in the future, that will actually feed into the chain. So I really want to stress the importance of looking into the oceans. That's really where we've had our food source from through the ages, and there are lots of opportunities to use better what we waste. We make food. We make something from to fashion industry from fish skin. We make medical products from fish gut and viscera, etc. The same goes for aquaculture. There's a lot of innovation that's taking place in aquaculture. And many places you actually utilize almost 100% of what you take from the sea. Norway, for example. And one, since governance was mentioned here, I think, and that's of course selfish and a biased approach, I think having organizations like Matís in Iceland, like Nofima in Norway, having the organizational capacity really means a lot. But it needs to engage with industry, because that's where changes actually happen. And I think we ought to look way beyond utilization. It's not about how much we utilize, it's about the value we create. And we need to communicate the potential in the new bioeconomy, especially the marine one, which is in a way blue growth potential, lots of that. And we need to communicate along the value chains. We ought to be proud as fishermen, as farmers, to tell people what we do, how we collaborate with science, how we handle the catch for the fishermen, how we work with young scientists, how we work with technology companies, really to tell the stories. And by doing that, by doing all this, we are creating nutrition. We're creating food, and we are making stories from the bioeconomy, the blue part of the bioeconomy and other parts. And it's really a matter of, inspiring people to go beyond and dive into the ocean of opportunities that is really in front of us. That's how I see it.
And just with Matís, are you working with all sorts of different players in the field, from those involved in science and research to the fishermen and women who may be going out catching whatever it is that they're bringing back to the ports?
Absolutely. And, I'm a farmer's son. My parents are organic farmers, so I know it firsthand. You really, it's trash in, trash out. That's a basic rule. So if you don't get it right, the first step of the value chain, there is no way you're going to make as much value as possible. So it's about the pride in the value chain. We really put emphasis on that. Training, but not from like an ivory tower point of view, but more on an equal level. And in my PhD, I think I learned more from fishermen, seafood professionals, than actually the university professors. So it's really about applying what you have in those industries and also communicate. Use the technology we have today. Everything is being disrupted. We got VR glasses communicating with younger generations, the millennials. They can't read scientific publications. Many of them can't simply. They're used to the Snapchats. They can't read complex texts. So we need to communicate in a different way and make people proud of what they do.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Richard, if I can go to you then. Speaking about research and innovation then, how do you make it more flexible to make sure we've got a sustainable food system?
No small challenge there then. Yeah, when you listen to what Mr. Potočnik's been saying, this doesn't sound like it's a very easy thing to do. And I think, so therefore, let's try and break it down and try and make it simple. Let's try and make it simple steps. So I think it's about researching, developing and piloting new approaches, new, more circular models. Using business as part of that. And I think what's quite interesting is that we are beginning to see that happening. So, for example, if you're up in the village hall, there's a project up there called Refresh, which is looking at you piloting consumer campaigning with voluntary agreements with businesses to reduce food waste right across the supply chain. Simple, straightforward stuff that's been used in the UK that reduced food waste by 1.6 million tonnes per year in 7 years. stuff that really makes a difference. One of my personal favourites actually is British Sugar's plant in Wissington. Now, I'm the son of an engineer, as it turns out, and I love engineering. Now, you go to a sugar plant, what do you think they do? Oh yeah, sure, they make sugar. Well, actually, this one's a bit different. What they do is they make as many products as they possibly can out of the things they buy. And they buy two things, sugar beet and oil. That's it. So how many products they make? Well, amazingly, they make sugar. Great. But they make soil. They're one of the biggest soil producers because they take the soil off the sugar beet and sell it back to people. They sell gravel. They take the CO2 from their CHP plant, and they're the biggest supplier of tomatoes under glass next to their plant. They create, from the byproducts of sugar, they make fish food. And now they're producing biofuels. So they're making all of those products simply from sugar beet. It's changing the way we think. I'm not a sugar factory. I'm trying to make as many things out of, add as much value as I can to the raw materials I've got coming into the plant. And then we say, okay, can we change these models? Can we connect the rural with the urban? Well, why not bring the rural to the urban? So one thing, you can go in the centre of London, you can go to a fish farm that produces tilapia, which is sold within a 3-mile radius of the factory. But it's not just a fish farm, it also produces salad. It takes the effluent from the fish farm, puts it into salad tanks and hydroponics, and the hydroponics then uses the nutrients that are in there that grows the salad, and they sell the salad as well. So we can give you salad and we can give you tilapia fish. And then the water goes back round and it goes in a nice circular model. Great. It brings the farm into the city. And guess what? It's even got a little area at the front that you can go and watch it all happen, so you can see where your food comes from. These are the types of innovations that we need to stimulate going forward. Take these ideas and generate new ones. Move us from the business as usual that we heard this morning to the business unusual, doing things differently. And the final thing, I think, is through research and innovation, is we need to shift our vision of the future of the food system. We have to move it from being part of the problem, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that John Bell said this morning, the real dreadful scenarios that Janez Potočnik just talked about, to being part of the solution. Can we think about a food system that moves towards carbon neutrality? One that actually builds, not wrecks, natural capital. We're moving from one that actually moves away from supplying calories to one that supplies nutrition. So at the heart of this, I think we should say our R&I agenda should be about shifting our horizons to delivering a more sustainable future.
Okay, very good, Richard. Thank you very much for that. Lydia, I suppose really quite a similar question, but how do we enable resilient systems for food production?
Okay, so resilience, what does this mean, by the way? Let's actually start there. And perhaps in the last sector, we were looking at in ways of resilience to maybe climate change and how things were going to change. I think what we should also always consider in terms of resilience, and maybe we've forgotten a little bit about it in the past, is the whole system and how it can continue to produce stuff, whatever it is, and all the sort of the basic fundamentals. One of my colleagues at NIAB used to call this, don't forget the knitting. And what he meant by that was, don't forget the rotation and the agronomy and the soil science and the soil biome, which we've heard about this morning. And if you do remember to not forget that, to put it in a strange way, then maybe you need to go back to some of the basics. So, for example, if we're looking at reducing waste, I think reducing waste is a fantastic thing. We shouldn't waste food, and we shouldn't waste food that has, if you like, yet to become food, that it's still in the farmer's field. But we also have to look at the resilience of the system. So you need a good quality soil that is resilient to changes in climate, to changes in the crop that you want to use, or the way in which you use that soil. So if you think, I'm going to get everything out, and actually it's interesting to use the Wissingen example, which is a brilliant one, and it's a really fantastic place to go and see. But they're not making soil, they're taking a little bit of that soil that is washed off the beet, and they're selling it. So that's going out of the farmer's field. There's a continuous removal of organic material from the soil, And so maybe, some of the fragility that we see in soils that was mentioned by a friend Janez are due to that slight, over the many years, reduction in organic matter. So we can't just keep taking. If we want to really use every different product from the field, such as the wheat and, of course, the straw and other components, at some point we've got to see there's a bit of a disconnect and we have to start putting things back, and I guess we have to put them back differently because we do want to seize all those opportunities. And then one other point I want to make about the resilience of the system, it needs to be resilient in terms of the bottom line of the farmers. Don't forget the farmers. So we had a fantastic workshop yesterday. I really enjoyed it. And we are talking about food, but don't forget the primary producers, the farmers. I didn't hear farmer or farming mentioned once yesterday. These guys have got to make money, and women increasingly. They don't look like the old flat cap chap that perhaps our ancestors. They're just as likely to look like anybody that we have on the stage today. They are technologically able, they are well briefed, and they are well able to get involved in research. I mean, it's great that we have these systems in the EU now where we can have farmer participation, but I think we should have participation in research projects. And so if we're going to do things that lead to waste, so Anne was talking about the ugly vegetables this morning, we shouldn't be wasting those ugly vegetables, we should be eating them. But let's remember the bottom line of the farmers. So the margins that fresh produce people have to deal with are probably under 5%. If we're eating more ugly vegetables, are we then selling less premium vegetables, and is that going to hit the suppliers?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And again, I'm sure we'll come back to some of the points that you have made there, Lydia. I want to go to Inge now because her Belgian company that she's involved in is very much involved in the production of biofertilizers and raw materials that go into the biofertilizers. And I think that's something that's important for you, is in terms of research and innovation, how you reduce the contaminants that may be in those products that go into your biofertilizers.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I would like to start with indeed explaining a bit what our company is doing. So we are an organic fertilizer company, and we already apply some principles of circular economy. We have been doing that for a very long time, but I say some principles because it's not a closed loop. That is a thing that I think we need more research in order to get there. But so what we are doing is we buy waste products from food industry. It could be from the animal food industry, so it could be bone meal, feather meal, these kind of things. We also buy waste products or byproducts from the plant-based industry, like soybean meal and things like that, cacao shells. But these are high-quality raw materials that we formulate into high-quality organic fertilizers that are completely biological. And that bring more than just nutrients to the soil, but they also bring carbon, they also bring structure to the soil. So the aim of our products is not just to bring nitrogen to the plant, but also to improve the soil system. Having said this, I think it's clear that it's important for us to have high quality raw materials that we can use in our factory, and that's not only for our company, it's also for other companies in our industry. And it's also very important for the agriculture. So these high quality raw materials, we are continuously looking for such raw materials, but it's not so easy to find them because every time, well, we have been studying a lot of waste products from the food industry in the last years, and one of the things that we have been confronted with many, many times is the issue of stability, quality, safety of such products. So in order for us to be able to use such raw materials, they need to be safe, they need to be traceable, they need to be transparent, and they need to be free of contaminants. And with contaminants, we mean the chemical contaminants, so it could be pesticides, could be heavy metals, could be other things that we don't even think at this moment. So how do we deal with that? Can we set up some kind of R&I or research projects in order to classify better the waste materials, the waste streams that we have from the food industry, and try to sort them better, try to have a classification system, and to know exactly what their characteristics are. and know exactly where they come from so that we can assess the risk better for certain specific contaminants. So I think we should try to think of a way of organizing our waste handling system in such a way that we can generate consistent and reliable waste flows. And maybe that brings us also to the idea of the business models, where we maybe need to think in advance before we start producing also our major products, think about what will be the side flows and how can we improve our process in order to have good side flows that can also be valorized. So that's about the chemical contaminants that could be present. We can also have issues with microbial contaminants, and then I mean pathogens or decay organisms. Our products go back into the food industry because these are fertilizers, they go to food crops. So it's very important that we are not bringing pathogens to our vegetables or other food crops that we are producing. This is also something we, of course, we are under strict control of the food safety authorities to monitor for these kind of things. However, if we're going to look to waste streams to use in the factory, it's not so easy to make sure that they are free of pathogens. So very often these materials are humid, they contain a high amount of water, so they are good sources for microorganisms to live, to grow. They are not stable, so we need systems to hygienize these materials and to stabilize them. And how do we do that? Now it's often done by drying, heating, and very often the system that is used for that is not sustainable at all because we use fossil fuels. We don't do it, but at least that's what you could do to have stable, hygienized products. And I think it's also what has been done now in the animal food industry. It's a heating process. We should try to find different ways to stabilize those materials in a sustainable way, not using fossil fuels, or at least trying to move on to renewable energy sources. So I think that's a major point for research. In addition, sometimes you would like to use maybe the more humid, the flows that contain some liquids, but then we need to be able to stabilize these by preservatives. And then we see that most of the preservatives that are at our disposition are chemical, and they are also not, sometimes they are, but sometimes they are not sustainable. So we think there is also a need for biological, organic, sustainable preservatives that can be used in products that go back to organic farming or to other sustainable farming systems. And so to conclude, I would like to say that we as a company and as an industry, we strongly believe in circular economy and the potential and the opportunities, and I think it's really the way to go forward. But we need to be vigilant that agriculture does not become the landfill of the society. So we should do it in a way that it's beneficial for the food production itself. So it should not be something that, okay, we have waste streams, let's give them to agriculture. No, it should be the other way around. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hear a mobile phone going off, so if we can, at least the noisy computer isn't going off this time round. If I can go to you, Stephane Guilbert, you're a professor in food science, but you also, interestingly, you're an advisor on sustainability of food systems, and in particular, one is urban food systems. Just even sticking with urban food systems, what needs to be done to make urban food systems more sustainable and which bring in the circular economy?
Thank you. I will, before answering the question, I will give an example. Coming from the work of one of my colleagues from Sorbonne University, Sabine Barl. She analyzed, by urban metabolism, analyzes urban nitrogen balance in the city of Paris. 100 years ago, 40% of nitrogen entering the city with the food was recycling by agriculture and livestock and farming, animal farming. Nowadays, either by recycling human excreta and food waste and leftover. Nowadays, it's only 4% which is recycled. Is to say then there is two consequences. The first consequence, of course, is you have to replace the nitrogen which is lost by chemical fertilizer to develop the agriculture or the animal feed. And the other consequence, of course, is you have an excessive nutrients discharge to environment and aquatic medium, for example, aquatic ecosystem resulting in eutrophication, oxygen depletion, algae bloom, and so on. So this example is just to emphasize the importance of material flow analysis to quantify the effect of the food system and eventually the effect of modification of this food system. For example, the effect of improving circularity in the food system. You can, after that, look at the effect by looking again at the material flow analysis at night, looking at where the data changed. It's very rapid to say that, but the four main questions to the research are first, and it has been said already, to control the risk of pathogen and contaminant spread along the chain and along the loop. And it's very important either for fertilizer, as you say, but in urban food system or in urban farm, when you have a company which build symbiosis together, exchanging material, waste, energy, and so on, they also exchange contaminants. And it's also a very important problem to solve by research, and it's a new problem for the research. Again, another question is what strategies for sorting and recovering bio-waste, cascading use of bio-waste, how to improve new urban practices. And then the bottleneck is not the new technologies, of course it is, but the main bottleneck is the reverse logistic, is to say, to stimulate sorting and recycling of waste in a very, talking about urban situation, in a very concentrated place where it's very difficult. You have logistic to bring a very specific produce to the consumer, but you don't have the reverse logistic to do the inverse and to sort the correct product for the correct industry. Also, what is very important is the urban planning, the zoning rules, the infrastructure dedicated to this closing loop, mainly in the city, for city as the main producer of bio-waste. Of course, another point very important is the priority to change standards and perception of bio-waste and of food elaborated with fertilizer coming from waste, or even food made with some ingredients coming from the recycling loop. It's also a change for the consumer, the change of image. Actually, the image of a good food is a virgin food. Let's say a food which came from a virgin field with virgin ingredients and so on. And if we want to improve the circularity, then we have to change the consumer image of food obtained by or obtained from recycling. The last point, very important, is the identification, use, and method for information sharing. For the circularity of the food system, it's also a very good and circular exchange of information and data exchange among the actors of the loop, for example, by using information and communication technologies, but it's also a very challenging point.
And just on the urban planning, what kind of improvements could be made there to encourage people to be much more mindful, obviously, of what they're wasting and then where to put it?
Yes, there are different means. Of course, it can be fiscal or taxes, either encouragement or, at the opposite, you can be taxed if your comportment is not the good one. It's a way, but as I told you, another very important fact is to build infrastructure dedicated either to urban agriculture, to urban transformation, food transformation, conservation of food. For example, in Berlin, there are some examples of public refrigerators in the streets. But it's anecdotic. But so new infrastructure in the city to take in account this necessity to close the loop for the food system.
Okay. Janez, Potočnik, do you want to add anything there to what we've heard so far from the different points that have been made?
Yeah, very quickly. I would like to apologize because I would then need to leave because I have, believe it or not, the third conference in Parliament in a few minutes. But just 3 points which I would like that are kept in mind in this very interesting debate. There was an interesting work done by True Cost. What would be the profit of the agricultural sector without including natural cost, which is currently the situation? The profit is, rightly you said, approximately 4%. And one has to be really careful there. Because this 4%, it's connected, yes, to farmers. But if you look to the whole value chain, you actually really see who is taking the majority of that. And don't look to farmers when you look to the profit margins, because you have to look to the others. And there is the real problem. And you will never solve the problem if you focus on agriculture only. So if you add to that natural costs, cost of natural capital, actually the whole sector goes to -10 profit margin, which it's nothing, again, to do with farmers, but it has to do something with the system which we have created, how much we are ready to, how we distribute the value, how much we are ready to pay for that value, and all those things are, of course, extremely important. The second point is this story out of silos is, which we basically all agree, it's extremely important. So all of us, all the governments, everybody, it's structured like that. And it's difficult to talk to each other and communicate even more. So, but normally the 3 big systems which are also the chunk of our household budgets are the mobility, food, and housing system. So they are approximately 60% of the cost of household budget. And if you look it through the resources, even much more. So even if you say the food system, you actually still stay in the silo. That's interesting. I think that's important to understand. I was recently on one of the workshops, and a guy who is working in construction sector, he said, no, we will not produce any more single houses. We will produce a kind of self-sustaining communities. In the middle, you will have plug-ins for electric cars. The electricity will fly from cars to the houses and back. The cars will be shared, and of course, there will be very serious urban food systems production, which we want to integrate into that. So aquaponica and other stories. So that's where we should go. And I think that's extremely important that we understand that this is the challenge which we are facing. And while in the in mobility sector, this system change, it's rapidly happening. I don't see it as much quickly happening in the agricultural sector. And I don't know if you have noticed, it was just 2-3 days ago that Bundesrat actually called Bundesrat, Germany, for a ban of combustion engines till 2030. So that's the system change which if you really want to have it and if you really want to move ahead. So there are 2 necessary conditions which needs to be met. First, the farmers need to admit that they have a problem. And the society needs to admit that the farmers are not responsible for the problem, but have worked in good faith, which means that this is creating a serious precondition for a public help for a transition. But transition is only possible if these 2 conditions are met. And of course, research should play an important role in that.
Okay, let's get some reaction from here. Sveinn, do you want to start first? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really, I definitely agree on this. And I want to bring us back to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs pretty much revolutionized few industries. And, he said you need to connect the dots. And that's what we are not doing in the ministries, in the silo ministries, which are kind of like, music industry was here, computers were here, etc. He just changed them. And I think we need to realize, if we don't act by our own means, somebody else is going to act. And that's going to be, it might be somebody that we don't really like. And that's just a fact, So it's either do it yourself or somebody does it for you. That's how I see it. And I think we need to be way better in realizing we talk about 3 billion new consumers. I'd like to say citizens, connecting to the former discussion. Those 3 billion citizens, will they have the same culture, the same taste as we have, as the normal consumer or citizen has today? I don't think so. And we know it's not like that. So that's one field that we need to dig into. How are the demands going to be changing? What are our stories really? Do we know what's happening in China? I can tell you one story actually from Iceland. It's short, I promise. We had the economic crisis. You all heard about that in 2008. I-7 and all that. It was really bad. And in bad situations, you do interesting things. So we decided to go for utilization, value creation. So lumpsucker is among the ugliest fishes you'll ever come across, actually. You don't like it. So that's why we've not been eating it. You don't like, let's be honest, we don't like ugly people, we don't like ugly fishes. So there was actually regulation put in place. You can't discard anything of the lumpfish or lumpsucker. We had been discarding everything but the roes, roughly 4 to 5%. So there was really a change from the regulation side. So I want to point into the direction of the regulation. Again, to your point, we need to go hand in hand with food safety regulations and circularity. No doubt about that. The outcome, 2 years later actually, was more export value by the rest of the body, the carcass, than roes. So more than doubling, actually, of export value based on lumpsucker. One last point, actually linking to lumpsucker as well, and China. The biggest IPO we've seen in the past years is Alibaba. And what's the value proposition of Alibaba? It's not production, it's service, and it's data. It's data management. It's using data to understand people. And we are not doing that. And we are not even using data to understand biology. Every day in Iceland, we collect millions of X-ray figures or pictures from fish, from ground fish. And we are not using that to understand the ecosystem. That's just one example of the many great achievements we could reach actually by connecting industry, academia and institutions, and then, of course, participation from society. People, citizens that actually want to tell how they feel, where things should be going.
Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Richard, yes, and then I want to bring in the rest of you as well in this. Richard, yes.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that sort of comes out of today is that you're sitting through, listening to all of the discussions, and it's quite easy to get quite pessimistic. Can we actually do this? Well, frankly, yes, we can. And frankly, we have to. We can all sit down and say, well, there are difficulties. Building a circular system around an urban economy, as Stephane says, is not trivial. We need to do it, but it's possible to do it. We are getting the food waste out of Wales as pretty much collecting all of its food waste. Now, everybody has a food waste bin in Wales. The recycling weight of food right across the hospitality sector, virtually no waste goes to landfill from the supermarket sector. There is progress. We found solutions. We put in standards in order to make sure we could recycle food back to soil safely. We are growing food with renewable fertilizers now. You probably ate it at lunch. So the key thing here is, I think, yes, we can get we can sort of look at all this. We look at the four horsemen and say, we're never going to do it. I think we can. Let's use it as an opportunity. Let's use it as a stimulation. But this is where I think the research and innovation agenda can come through, because it can help us achieve. And that's what I think we need to do. Let's look at it on the positive. Let's not look on the negative.
Okay, Lydia, and I don't know if you wanted to specifically talk about the farming issue as well that Mr. Potočnik brought up.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about economics.
Yeah.
And I think that farmers do realise that, you know, that there is a problem to be dealt with there, and actually they do deal with it. You know, there are an enormous number of innovations coming out of farming which are not relating to just a response to CAP or to subsidies of one kind and another, and there's ways of responding to diversification and so forth. Just one little negative point before I go back to the positive side. We just have to get the structural legislation right and be very careful of it. So I can't remember what the statistic was, but the number of pig farmers who went bust over the last decade was shocking. And I stopped eating pig meat because I didn't think that the welfare standards were good enough, and now I think they're fantastic. But the Irish farmers, I don't know how they managed, because they were bringing in feed, so they already had quite high outgoing, and they had to hit legislation, and their margins were absolutely paper thin at one point. So great, and they managed it because they innovated and they changed the style of their feed composition and so forth. But to get back to the positive side, which I promised, I just judged an Innovative Farmers competition a few weeks ago, and there was some great stuff there. They were all aware of the fact that they need better resilience in the soil system, and there were lots of really great stuff coming through, and I won't jump the gun because they haven't been given the prize yet. But 3 out of 5 were really interesting ways of improving soil quality, resilience, and organic matter.
Okay, brilliant. I just want to get Inge and Stephane final. Do you want to come in? Maybe a final one for you. Stephane.
To be positive also, I think it's important to encourage research, but there are many innovations coming from the society, and mainly on emergence of new solidarities, citizen initiatives, social networking, participative and solidarity economy, and so on. And a lot of initiatives come from from the society, and also a lot of initiatives come from SMEs, which are very, very innovative in these specific topics of societal problems. And together, research, society, and innovative SMEs can be part of the solution. Of course, they have to be helped by the policies and by a good coordination of the policies. One big problem is often policies are in contradiction together. For example, policy for nutrition are in contradiction with policy for health, which are in contradiction with policy to promote circular economy. And very often, it's a break and a bottleneck for the development of innovation and initiatives.
And which is why people were talking earlier in the day about a food policy as such, which would feed across, you know, other policies that need to be implemented. Inge, before we leave the panel, final words from you.
Yeah, I just like to add, I fully agree with my colleague here. So I just want to say that I think it's really important indeed when we do this research that we go over the different sectors, over the different industries, and that we try to have collaboration between SMEs, but also big companies, research institutes that have completely different expertises. And that we also need expertise from completely different industries outside of the food industry in order to tackle these issues. In terms of technology, what kind of technologies do we need in order to optimize this loop system? I think there are many things that can be done, but I think it's really important to have this collaboration, and I see that in practice as a company. It's not so easy to find programs in which you can collaborate with companies from completely different industries. Like, for example, we have one project, it's a European project where we work together with a vegetable processing company. So they produce vegetables, they process them, and we are working together with them to see can we use their waste flows and try to see if we can get them to be standardized, hygienized, and so on. And what would be very interesting is seeing can we invest together in some kind of stabilization system. And these kind of questions, I think it could be very interesting to address this as a very big European consortium.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And actually, just as we were talking about waste reduction and processes, our third Twitter poll, the question was, how can research and innovation best increase resource efficiency and reduce food losses and waste? So 52% of the vote was for the option to waste reduction technologies and processes. So I think that touches quite a bit on what we were doing. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you could show your appreciation for our excellent panel. Thank you very much for that. Really, really interesting. Very, very good. Very good. And continue to tweet and share your views. We'll see if we can bring in some more of you for the final panel. So I'm going to say goodbye to the panelists, and we're going to move to cities. They're going to go off that direction, and we are going to have one more panel debate, as I said. That'll be after the break. But we want to hear from the perspective of cities now, and we're going to hear from two of our guests here. One is Pierfrancesco Maran, who is the Deputy Mayor of Milan, and he's going to talk about Urban Food Policy Pact. And then we're going to hear from James Taplin, who's the lead technologist for urban living at Innovate UK. James is going to talk about what people are saying about integrated urban system futures. So, Pierfrancesco, perhaps you could join us up here. You should be ready to go.
Thank you very much. Well, first we started on a question: how much citizens are aware of the food problems? And our idea is that this is not as much as needed. That is also why in 2008 we decided that the world event we would host in 2015, the exposition, would have as a theme Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life. And to talk about food, it was at the beginning considered, especially in our city by citizens, the idea that it was not the food problem, but the, how to say, like a restoration. And it is also why we decided to focus our contribution as a city on the idea of the food policy. Of course, we know what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. We know that we have a responsibility, but we still have some problem to connect those things and to create action from that. The complexity of the theme need integrated solution, and the food, as we said before, it's one of the themes we should work more, maybe more than on the other sustainable themes where we obtained much results in the last period. And we know that lots of cities have started before Milan on working on a food policy, but what we decided to do before the exposition 2015 was the fact that, okay, everybody, some cities got their food policy, but we need a pattern, we need a guideline to create a scheme of urban food policy. And it is what we worked with other cities, with the stakeholders, with the foundation and association, in order to sign the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact that was subscribed in October 2015. Here is our former mayor of Milan with Ban Ki-moon. And it is, it has been for us very important, even because it was a way to cooperate with other cities. Milan is part of the C40 network, of Eurocities network, and we were really helped by them to create the network around the Milan Urban Food Policy that was subscribed actually by 129 cities, in which they live 500 million of people of the world that are probably one of the most relevant consumers of food. And How does it work? We had the pact. We work on defining 37 inputs and action, and to work on good practices, starting from the fact that probably we have something to teach the other, but for sure we have lots of things to learn by other cities and experiences. This is the approach we worked on, the fact that even mayors need a vision. Sometimes you can work on your own, but if you have a pattern and a scheme, it's easier. We have to work on the engagement. We saw it even for the urban food policy connected with other cities, but even when we decided to work more or less in the same time on our city food policy. The engagement is decisive even because we have to work especially on the awareness of citizens. These are the themes the food policy is based on. And how we are working? Well, first we said that we have to raise the awareness of citizens, public administration, and the society. The idea is an award. Then there is the political commitment, and then of course there are the actions. We are working, most of the cities, with their single, the city policies. The award is in a special moment because today we are talking about food in Brussels, but even today and tomorrow we will do the same in Rome, where there will be the award of the urban food policy. And we are also working on the idea of monitoring the framework in order to create a system that can help us not only to go on in the future with the system and to help other cities to enter in this system and to promote their urban food policy. This has been very useful, especially for us. We saw it in our cities where, okay, we write our urban food policy, but now we are moving to action, and especially on lunches at school, especially on peri-urban agriculture, we are not only making good efforts, but we also having big results in order to, this is a very important moment for the pericultural agriculture in our cities. We are working on schools in order to use products from the territory around the city. And this also helps us to create a culture of the respect of food that is really important, especially in the new generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So now we're going to hear from James Taplin, the lead technologist for urban living at Innovate UK. James.
Hi there, afternoon all. I'm going to talk briefly about this project we've been doing called the Future Cities Dialogue. We've heard a lot today about the food system, but I guess what I'm going to talk about more is the importance, as we've heard recently, about integrating the food system with other systems as well. So, Innovate UK, for those who don't know, we're UK's innovation agency funded by government. The bit that I work on, the urban living bit, is explicitly trying to look at where are cities going, what do citizens need in their cities in the future, how you're going to provide those needs, and then effectively funding new collaborations between business, between academia, between places to create those solutions that deliver then those successful, sustainable cities. So we know, and as we've heard today, that cities are really on the front line of these challenges. There's increasing demand for the services that they're providing, and at the same time there's a reduced supply of the resources they need to meet those demands, whether those economic resources they can put into meeting the citizen needs, or whether they're physical environmental resources in providing the goods and services that people want. So cities are squeezed in both directions. They have to do more with less. Under those circumstances, they can no longer just do things better. They really have to do better things. And the way to do that, or one of the ways of doing that, is to look at how you integrate your systems better. So at the moment, again, as we've heard, many city systems are highly siloed. And at best, they just sort of trundle along against each other. At worst, they actively antagonize one another. So arguably, the transport system and the health system, the way those are developed in cities, are fundamentally at odds with one another. As we've heard, likewise, the food system and the health system similarly butt up against each other in a multitude of ways. So if you have to make more with less, then what you have to do is you have to make an investment in one system increase the resilience and stability of other systems. And to do that, you have to integrate your systems better. So there's a huge market for this. And what we wanted to know, actually, is, it's not a new idea, but why isn't it happening? And what does integrated systems look like? What can you integrate and what can't you integrate? And more importantly than anything else, what do people really want from their cities of the future? So I'll skip over this, which was a slight detour into my childhood, which you don't need to hear about right now. So for anyone who was involved in the Food Visions 2030 workshop yesterday, this is a kind of fairly standard process. I'm going to talk you through a little bit what we did. We started off with a whole lot of trends cards, about 40 different trends that looked at where the world might be going, some sort of macro trends, some system-specific trends. And we took those into 6 expert workshops. So we looked at energy, food, transport, health, water, and waste. And from those, we prioritized the trends, and then in groups, we then kind of said, okay, if these 3 trends combined, what might that mean for the food system, for example? And out of those workshops, we then developed about 3 or 4 different outcomes for each of those systems. So 3 or 4 different food futures, 3 or 4 different energy futures, so on and so forth. And then so this, for example, is a very kind of summary of what we were doing with some of the kind of the food outcomes. And they're necessarily extreme, because if you're trying to get people's views on things, what you want is to define the sort of the outside of the boundary space, so you can work out what people's preferences are between differences. And the reality, clearly, is not going to be any of these. It's going to sit somewhere in the middle of them. It'll be a combination of different futures in different places and different times. But so we went with 4 different outcomes, one which is broadly sort of government-driven, where the government keeps me healthy, one which is very community-driven, one which is effectively an extension of kind of business as usual, which is the high-tech, low supply, and one which is very high-tech and functional, where we have lots of 3D printing and not lab-grown meat. I learned that's the wrong terminology, but I can't quite remember what the right one is. So we took those 2 then workshops, citizen workshops, in 3 cities around the UK, and also an online panel, to find out what people wanted. And they told us what they liked about the various different futures and what they didn't like. The report that's coming out, sort of the headline for food, for example, is people really valued localism. They disliked anything which took them further away or increased the lack of transparency between them and their food. They rejected anything which led to a loss of community or loss of skills. That was very important for them. And there are various other findings which we can talk about later. So from that, we had a number of desirable system outcomes, an idea about what people wanted, what food future did people want, what energy future did people want. And then we took those and we kind of crunched them all together through a process called field anomaly relaxation, if you're at all interested in sort of futures processes, to kind of work out which of these different futures could work together and which couldn't, and what would give you a coherent, integrated future. And we came up with a number of different scenarios, which we again then brought all of the people back together again and said, okay, here are some visions of what your city could be like in 2040. We're looking at 2040, not 2030, but much of a muchness. And came up with 3 sort of finalized scenarios about the way that people would be living, sort of days in their life, what are the integration of the different systems, how does each system work? And again, ask people, what they wanted. And because it's necessarily a very complex set of data that you're dealing with, we had to hold something constant. So actually, the 3 scenarios we looked at in the end, one is based on sort of national governance, one is based on a strongly devolved sort of city-level governance, and one's based on what would happen if everything was organized at a community level. So we had these scenarios, and we're using them with cities at the moment, so working with cities across the UK to understand which of these scenarios do you most identify with, what's the future that you're building for your citizens. And also we got sort of 8 design principles, which I guess is what I want to leave you with briefly, which are sort of, if you're going to create urban integrated systems, these are the sort of the 8 things, and they're not going to be very surprising for you, but it's good to have had them validated. The first is that systems need to be resilient and evolutionary, so there has to be redundancy built in. You really want, stability and resilience comes from diversity in this case. So you want to have a multitude of different solutions to a particular problem, to a system, so that if one fails, another kind of can step in to take its place. You also want a sort of a landscape and an ecosystem of these approaches, so that different ones can succeed, can grow, can fail, can fade in different places and different times based on different needs. You want it to be tech-enabled, but not tech-centered. It's not all about the smart. There's lots of smart solutions out there, but actually what you really want is encouraging kind of social interaction and building skills. That was really important for everybody. You want it to be well-governed. That's not actually very well put. What you need to do is understand that governance comes from an increasingly wider range of places, and different systems are better governed at different levels. And there's quite a lot. For example, the food system, people wanted it governed at the local level. The health system, people were very clear they wanted that governed at the national level. They wanted it to be sustainable. Again, no big surprise, but in terms of what they were saying explicitly is that they wanted solutions which built urban natural capital, so which increased the amount of green space, increased the kind of the health and well-being sides of that in cities. And they wanted solutions which built social fabric again, which brought people together rather than isolated them. They also wanted systems to be human-centered. So integrating systems is ultimately about integrating people. There's sort of two challenges you have when you're integrating systems. There's a technical challenge about how do you bring this infrastructure together. And there's a lot of kind of redundant, there's a lot of legacy that we've got in infrastructure systems, which means it's quite hard to do that. But that's kind of a technical engineering challenge, and arguably that's easier than the legacy we have in sort of human systems, which is about people's expectations of the way their services are provided to them and the way that they meet their needs. And if you're going to change systems, again, as we've heard today, you really need to understand that behavioral side about how do you get people to accept different changes and different ways of doing things. And you need to stimulate participation. Clearly, if you're building a solution at the city level, then you have to engage the citizens and you have to have that active participation. It needs to be globally linked. Again, not very surprising, but this is a global challenge. You need to learn from others. You need to create communities of interest. It has to be value networked, and this is something we're doing some work on. So the costs and benefits of system change fall on many, and actually the people who you want to invest in an integrated solution are not necessarily those who are going to get the benefits from it. So if you're investing in a better transport system, for example, you might well find the health system gets a lot of the benefits through cleaner air, reduced road fatalities, so on and so forth. So you have to understand those value networks. And you have to have a mechanism of understanding how you bring those different players together so you can develop an integrated solution up front with then multiple potential future beneficiaries. And then, again, as we've talked about today, there has to be this, everything has to be transparent. Whatever the future is going to be, there's a huge element of data sharing, data generation, lots of personal data that's going to be generated. And people were really clear that they wanted to know how that data was going to be used and have the opportunity of opting in and opting out as they wanted to. Again, interestingly, they were very happy to share their data about health. So if it was clearly for the benefit of a wider range of the population, they'll share their health data. They did not want anybody knowing what was in their bins. That's the last thing they wanted, is knowing what people knowing what they were throwing away. So again, understanding where they're keen to share data and where they're not is important. And then very finally, got an example of just a sort of simple example of what an integrated system. So urban food growing, green roofs is not necessarily a huge solution for the food system, but if you look at the integrated benefits of that in terms of reducing air pollution, in terms of reducing the cooling load on buildings, on improving sustainable urban drainage systems so you don't get so much flooding, on improving mental health and well-being. Systems like this are critical then for building sustainable urban futures. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, and to you as well, Pierfrancesco, again, for being able to be so concise. I know you had an awful lot of material to deal with, so we really appreciate that. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a break. If you can be back here for 4:30, if everybody's back in the room, we can begin the last panel discussion on time so that we're all ready to go at 6 o'clock. So again, usual scenario, you can either go at the back or come down here to the Village Hall. Thank you.